Hi, my name is Noam Mizrahi. I'm an associate professor at the Department of Bible and also the current director of the Orion Center for the study of the Dead Sea Scrolls and associated literature. My fields of research are the Dead Sea Scrolls, both biblical and non-biblical. I'm working on the development of the Hebrew language, the ancient Hebrew language, the textual transmission of the Hebrew Bible, but also poetic and liturgical texts that were composed during the Second Temple period and eventually ended up among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, so the challenge of studying the Dead Sea Scrolls nowadays, after we have passed the 75th anniversary for the discovery of the scrolls, is of course very different from what it used to be, let's say in 1947 or 57 or 67. Nowadays, all the Dead Sea Scrolls have been published. All the fragments are available both for the broader public and for the scholarly community. And our greatest challenge nowadays, I would say, is to make sense of the material and no longer to think just in terms of manuscripts and fragments, but also to think in terms of larger, more holistic literary compositions, and try to understand how these literary compositions have been evolved, created, redacted, and disseminated, and eventually also some of them have also had a reception history all the way down into the Middle Ages and the modern age. This is, I would say, the first major task of contemporary research. On the other hand, we also have somewhat of, I would say, contradictory trajectory, and this is that a lot of what we're doing nowadays depends on the work of the earlier scholars who have assembled all the tiny pieces and pieced them together into these gigantic puzzles that we call the scrolls. But actually, many of these decisions about piecing together these individual fragments can be debated, questioned, corrected, or of course confirmed in many cases. Looking back on the tremendous work that has been done by our predecessors and try to improve it to the greatest extent we can. And this is also a point in which digital tools, which are not available for our predecessors, can be of immense help nowadays. Until 12 years ago, almost none of the scrolls were available electronically. So transcriptions were available, but the images, the photographs of the actual fragments were not available. The Israel Antiquities Authority 12 years ago launched a very ambitious project which really transformed research, the Leon Levy Digital Library of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which everyone nowadays used in the field. But more than a decade later, we look into the next phase of challenges, and I would say that we need now to rethink about the relationship between the physical fragments, the broader joints, which are always hypothetical, they're always the function of scholarly theories, and the broader literary compositions, which are second-order entities which are composed on the basis of these scholarly hypotheses. But if we look backwards into the level of the individual fragment, we realize that every once in a while, certain fragments were joined incorrectly or not necessarily in the exact angle. And if we move them, if we switch them from one column to another column, then the whole content of the text changes, and then the text itself changes. So we need to rethink about that, and we need to think big. We need to think about the entire collection. What we call the Dead Sea Scrolls are basically mostly the remains of scrolls. That is, none of the scrolls, almost none of the scrolls were found intact. Even the best preserved scrolls are usually composed of at least several fragments, and these fragments were joined by human. So everything here is open to debate and question. And we're talking about roughly 25,000 fragments. These fragments were documented in photographs since the late 40s all the way to the present in thousands of photographs and images, and we need to have a repository, for instance, of all this huge collection, and also to have the digital means, which only nowadays we have, to differentiate between the different fragments on each image and identify them in different images, and to also to track down the physical transformation of fragments, because fragments join or disintegrate and change their shape. And all this is crucial if we would like to reconstruct the entire collection of fragments and to understand how they interact together. I would also mention that we need to always keep in mind that the Dead Sea Scrolls is only a subset of a much larger corpus of texts, and this is of course Second Temple Jewish literature, some of which was preserved in Hebrew and Aramaic and Greek, and some of which has been preserved only in translation, sometimes in secondary translations. For instance, the Book of Jubilees, we have some fragments in Qumran in the original Hebrew, but the text in its entirety was translated into Greek, and only very little of this Greek version is preserved. And the only text which preserves the entire Book of Jubilees is actually in Ge'ez, in classical Ethiopic. So we need to bring the Dead Sea Scrolls into conversation with a much wider circle of languages, of cultures. And again, the Book of Jubilees was preserved not just in a vacuum, it was preserved by a certain Eastern church in which it had its own what we call in German Nachleben, the afterlife of this text beyond antiquity, and every aspect of this transmission deserves its own attention and study. So really I would say what we need nowadays is more and more the kind of integrative studies. Nowadays we stand on a much firmer ground in conducting such integrative research. So the question of understanding the Dead Sea Scrolls, the meaning of the Dead Sea Scrolls nowadays is of course dependent upon the person who supplies the response, and I imagine that every scholar would give a different answer. But I would say that for me, a very meaningful aspect of the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the study of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the internal diversity of ancient Judaism which it exposes. So we tend to think that only nowadays, that there are debates about what is the meaning of being Jewish, how many different definitions of Jewishness there are, do they exclude each other, do they complement each other? But actually, if we go back to Second Temple Judaism, nowadays, thanks to the Dead Sea Scrolls, we realize that this Judaism was as diverse, as complicated, as conflictual as was Judaism in later generations, to the extent that some scholars even refrain from speaking about Judaism in the singular and prefer to speak about Judaisms in the plural. But I would say that all these movements, some of them we call sects, other debate about this particular term, but in any case we see really a tremendously rich, variegated, with internal contradictions, kind of stream of identities from which our current and present identities also draw. So it's essential, I think, to understand the complexity of the ancient evidence, because it supplies some of the foundations of our contemporary positions, sometimes knowingly and sometimes unknowingly, but it also supplies new materials which we're not fully aware of, which can help us construct new identities to cope with new challenges. On the institutional level, my hope is that the Orion Center will continue to be the home for every scholar, from doctoral students and even MA students all the way to senior scholars who are interested in the Second Temple period in the broadest sense of this term, in the literature, theology, ideology, texts, etc., archaeology, and the Orion Center will be the home and the hub for all these scholars who arrive to Israel and to Jerusalem in particular. The center is happy to provide them with academic sponsorship and a framework, and of course some academic resources to work in this very enriching context. And I think we also have a very vibrant community of scholars, of fellows, of interns, of both academic and administrative staff. And it's really a wonderful place to be and to have research together and to share ideas and exchange thoughts. On a more personal level, I have several projects on the table as we speak. I have projects supported by the Israel Science Foundation about fragmentary scrolls of the book of Isaiah, which provide us a sort of a glimpse into the ancient phases of the textual transmission and the reception history, interpretive reception history of the book. And I would be happy to bring this project to completion. And on the other hand, I also have another project on a non-biblical text, the Songs of the Sabbath Sacrifice. It's a fascinating liturgical work which speaks about the angels officiating as high priests at the heavenly temple. And this project, I'm writing a commentary for the Oxford Commentaries on the Dead Sea Scrolls series. And although I'm exhilarated to work on that, I would be also happy to bring it to the point of elevation that allows me to continue to the next project as well. This is a very challenging text with many interpretive cruxes, but I think that we've reached the point in which some conclusions can be reached, and thanks to the work that again was done by our predecessors, we can also prepare the ground for the next generation. We'll ask new questions about this text and all the other texts from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we have to give, to pass on the baton to the next generation as well. So I would like to emphasize that the Orion Center is really an international hub of scholarship. We have hosted scholars from almost all continents upon the planet. English is our first language. We have constant flow of visitors from Europe, from North America, sometimes from Australia and Latin America. It's really a tremendous place to get into touch with a variety of people that come from all over the place and exchange the kind of experience that they have gained in their places of origin. And it's in that sense, I would say, this is one of the most international spots within the Faculty of Humanities and certainly within the Institute of Jewish Studies. We have a wide variety of cooperations with both local and international institutions and personalities. I would especially stress the very fruitful and long relationship with the Israel Antiquities Authority, the IAA, with which we have cooperated for many years on the one hand, and the Israel Museum and the Shrine of the Book there in particular on the other hand. I have just published a commentary, for instance, on Pesher Habakkuk, which was an initiative of the Shrine of the Book, and it's part of a larger venture on rendering the best preserved Dead Sea Scrolls for the wider public. We also cooperate with a range of other institutions in Jerusalem, the Albright Institute, which is an American institution for higher education and advanced scholarship in archaeology and antiquity in general, the École Biblique and Archéologique, and of course now the Pontifical Biblical Institute as well. So a wide range of institutions that allow, I would say, being in this place allows you to be in touch with really a whole range of civilizations and cultures and academic cultures just by being here and see the various people that come and go from the various places. So I think I told you that I have a project on the fragmentary scrolls of Isaiah from Qumran, the Qumran caves, and this is an example. Of course, this is not an original scroll, but this is an accurate one-to-one replica. This is an example, this is a replica of a scroll called 4Q Isaiah C, the third copy of Isaiah from Qumran Cave 4. And this is a very interesting scroll for all sorts of reasons. Originally, there are some 50 fragments, this is only a few, which demonstrate that the scroll originally contained the entire book of Isaiah. It has different interesting variants vis-a-vis Masoretic text, the received text of the Hebrew Bible, but also it's interesting for all sorts of other respects. You would notice, for instance, you get into the Tetragrammaton, the divine name of God, and this name is consistently written in this scroll, not in the square script, which is the usual way of writing Hebrew in the Spirit, although originally, of course, this is an Aramaic script, but in the old Hebrew script. For instance, in the last line, you can see very clearly that the name, the Yod Hei Vav Hei of the Tetragrammaton, is written in Paleo-Hebrew script, not in the square script, and this is just one of many interesting scribal features of this scroll. The scribal hand is extremely elegant. This is a very proficient scribe who wrote that scroll. Very careful in many respects. There are hardly any, for instance, any corrections in this scroll, and this is why the variants, the places where it differs from the Masoretic text, are even more interesting, because clearly this is not a negligent scribe who was just doing something out of memory. He was very careful when copying the biblical text. So this is one example of the kind of projects that I'm personally doing and the kind of projects that we're doing at the Orion Center. I would also mention we're also cooperating with the University of Haifa and the Bialik Institute in publishing volumes of a Hebrew journal on the Dead Sea Scrolls and Second Temple literature. It's called Megillot. We have just published the 16th volume. We're already working diligently on the 17th volume, which we hope to publish within the next 6 months or so. And this is really the main forum for publishing scientific study on the Dead Sea Scrolls in Hebrew. And some of the papers published here have been the basis for large-scale projects on the Dead Sea Scrolls as well.